Morning, everyone. Um, just bear with us for a minute while my lovely assistant gets my slides going. Um, button. Yes. So as you'll see in just a second, my hang on, let me. I don't want that. Actually, it doesn't really matter what's on there because I'm not using my slides. Well, I'm not using them as my notes. So in a second, you'll see that this is my sermon today is titled "Perfect." And while it's titled perfect, I will more be speaking on imperfection, on pain and suffering and all the fun stuff. And that sounds really depressing, but actually, I'm hoping that today can be an encouragement because this is what God has put on my heart for me to encourage me. So hopefully, it can encourage you guys as well. Um, so, yeah, there it is. Um, and I will also fit in some of Nehemiah just for the sake of continuity. That's the word. Uh, just so that it can kind of fit into everything. Nehemiah is a very easy one to fit into what I'm preaching on because did you know that Nehemiah's story is not a happy ending? And that it shouldn't be a surprise if you know much about the Bible. Most stories aren't happy endings in the Bible besides the story of Jesus, but we'll get to that, and maybe that's a hint of the encouragement and the depressing bit. But I'm going to read chapter 13 of Nehemiah, which is the last chapter in the Bible, not in the Bible, but in the book of Nehemiah. And so this is kind of how the story of building the wall of Jerusalem and rebuilding Jerusalem and the temple and everything, that this is how it ends for Nehemiah. But fair warning, it's a very long chapter. So what I've done is I've condensed it. It's still, the context is all still there, but so I'm not preaching until 1 o'clock. I have condensed it. So I'm not going to put it up on there because it's still quite long. So just follow along, just so we can get the context of how Nehemiah ended. So we can kind of get into the point of what I'm preaching on about. Not perfection, but imperfection. Um, so Nehemiah 13, you can go home and read it yourself later if you want the full story. Sorry. So Eliashib the priest, having authority over the storerooms of the house of our God, had prepared for Tobiah a large room where previously they had stored the grain offerings, the frankincense, the articles, the tithes of grain, the new wine and oil, which were commanded to be given to the Levites and singers and gatekeepers, and the offerings for the priests. But during all of this, I was not in Jerusalem. Then I returned and discovered the evil that Eliashib had done, and it grieved me bitterly, so I set it right. I also realized that the portions for the Levites had not been given to them, for each of the Levites and the singers who did the work had gone back to his field. So I contended with the rulers and said, "Why is the house of God forsaken?" So I tried to set that right as well. Remember me, O my God, concerning this, and do not wipe out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God and for its services. In those days, I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves and loading donkeys with wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them about the day on which they were selling provisions. Men of Tyre dwelt there also, who brought in fish and all kinds of goods and sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. So I set that right as well. So it was at the gates of Jerusalem, as it began to be dark before the Sabbath, that I commanded the gates to be shut and charged that they must not be opened till after the Sabbath. Then I posted some of my servants at the gates so that no burdens would be brought in on the Sabbath day. Now the merchants and sellers began to hover just outside the gates like vultures. Then I warned them and said to them, "Why do you spend the night around the wall? If you do so again, I will lay my hands on you." That's not my paraphrase, by the way. And I set them right also. Remember me, O my God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of your mercy. In those days, I also saw Jews who had married outsiders, and half of their children could not even speak the language of Judah, but spoke according to their foreign languages. One of the grandsons of the high priest was even the son-in-law of a pagan, so I set that right. Remember them, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. Thus, thus I cleansed them of everything pagan and tried to set the city right. Remember me, O my God, for good. So Nehemiah had this, hang on, God, I need that. So Nehemiah had this vision. He had a mission sent from God, a beautiful mission that worked just perfectly, right? Like it was so clearly sent from God. He addressed the king. The king gave him his blessing. He got the men, he got the finances, he got everything he needed. It was clearly blessed by God. It worked perfectly. But then it fell to ruin because instantly people returned to Jerusalem and did the exact things that caused Jerusalem to be destroyed. And so, once again, this might sound all depressing at first, but I'm hoping that there is some encouragement in it. Because let's be honest, life is hard, it's full of troubles. And I've heard a lot of theologies that kind of preach this idea that whenever good things happen, it's because you've been blessed. It's because God is awarding you for being good, for following Him and having faith and doing all of these things. But whenever you see bad times, it's because you've messed up, because you've done something wrong and God is punishing you. But this theology that I've heard so many times leaves people feeling betrayed by God. And I believe that, we hear about all of these statistics of people leaving the church. I believe that this is one of the big reasons why, because people believe that when bad times come, it's because they've been betrayed by God. But let's get one thing right, and this is very clear in the Bible. You can do everything right. You can follow God to a T, have full faith, and still lose. Like Nehemiah, we might go in with full faith, full confidence in Christ, but rather by our own hands or by the hands of somebody else or by just life, we might fail. So we ask ourselves, happily ever after. We spend our lives chasing after that. But does it ever come? Life isn't Disney. And we have little control over the things that happen to us. And even the things that we do for God will turn to dust. That's what Solomon said, even like all of these chasings, even the good things we do, it turns to dust in the end. And this is a common biblical theme, as I've said. And I promise I'm going to get to like the happy bit of all of this. Like it's not just going to be like a Debbie Downer the whole morning. I promise. Just wait. Uh, so it's a common biblical theme. Take Moses. He's one of the very good examples of this. He was sent by God to free the Israelites. So he leads them out of slavery, and they instantly turn around and beg to return to their captors. Then Moses sees God face to face and begins to form with God a plan for the Israelites' future. And while he's doing this, they're building golden calves to worship. And because of all of this, because of the Israelites, Moses never even got to see the promised land or enter the promised land. He saw it, but that's even worse. there it is over there. I can't go. Uh, Noah built an ark. He was called by God to do this. So he builds this ark. He rides out the storm. And once the waters pass, he gets drunk and does unspeakable things that we won't talk about. David became the holy king anointed by God, raised up as the last son in a line of sons, set as the king, and then he decides that he's going to get a married woman pregnant and murder her husband. So we see, like, whether it's by other people's hands or our own, like, just this continual theme of failure. We fail over and over again. Nehemiah saw the work of his hands, not his own fault, but he saw his works, his faith, quickly fall to ruin. Does anybody relate to any of this? I keep, like, every time at this point, like, I get this thought in my mind, Lincoln Park tried so hard and got so far, and in the end, it doesn't even matter. Like, if anybody not likes that music. But I know that I relate to this a lot. I spent my 20s serving God, traveling the world, just trying to help people. And time again, whether it was my own insecurities or other people, I was constantly held back from serving God. Like I was still serving Him, but not in the ways that I felt called because of human imperfection, whether my own or whether somebody else's again. Now, these days, I feel like I'm being held back because of my body, because of my health issues. Like there's so many things I want to do, but I can't because most days I can barely leave my house. And so we chase happily ever after, but it rarely comes. So this is this idea that I've been turning over in my head. We are not perfect. Our plans and the works of our hands will not lead to perfection, even when we have pure hearts and we are blessed by God, like Nehemiah. Not yet. This is where the encouraging bit comes, I think. So So here's the thing, we are not perfect, and we cannot make things perfect. We cannot create perfect things. But God is perfect. God has a perfect plan, and with that, He can make things and us perfect. But what is perfect? This is the segment that I always have of etymology, where I think I said that right, I can't even speak right now. But so we look at the word and we discover what it means so we know what we're talking about when we say perfect. What is perfect? Now, the Hebrew word is tamim and the Greek teleos. And this is very easy for us today because both words mean the exact same thing. This means every time you see in the Bible the word perfect, they're saying the same thing. They have the same meaning. They're trying to lead us to the same truth and understanding. And that meaning is complete, whole. God is the perfect completion of themselves. You get that? God is a perfect completion of themselves. As the Father, as the Son, and as the Spirit, God is whole. God is complete. But we have a hole. We have a hole in our heart. We are broken, incomplete, all the way back from the garden. We lost something. We lost a part of ourselves. We are broken. We are not whole. And we are torn apart by the troubles of life. And this hole in our hearts can only be filled through the one that is complete, and that's Jesus. I press that. Oh, yeah, there it is. Now, Paul understood this complexity of life better than most, and he gave his own thoughts about it in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. And I will read that. I'll actually put it on the screen so you can follow along because it's much shorter. So, chapter 12, verses 7 through 10. A thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly, I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I will take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Paul noted here how our brokenness leaves gaps in our heart. And here he's encouraging us that when we are weak, when we're in pain, when we mess up, when we fall down, when we've been let down and betrayed, when we're alone, that we can turn to Jesus because that's where the fullness, the completion will come. He said that we can rejoice in the holes that life brings us because those holes are where the love of Christ can fit into us. And I do need to make a little point here because it's very important you understand I am not deluded. This is easier said than done. it's not useful to say, don't be upset, be happy whenever you're in pain, because pain is pain and it's terrible. It's not good. And it doesn't come from God. God doesn't give us pain, God doesn't break us. Paul himself said in these passages that it came from Satan. But God can turn those things into something better. That these holes that form in us is where we become malleable and allows God to strengthen us and to make us perfect. The rest of us, the rest of ourselves that does not have these holes where God can come in, is just that. It's just self. And self without God is dust. So this is why Paul was encouraged that this brokenness is where we get strengthened by God, where we can find the love of God. So Nehemiah, he did everything right. He followed Yahweh God. He had faith. He worked hard, and life messed it up. So this is my thought. This is what God's been challenging me with and encouraging me. So hopefully, again, I'm hoping that this is all an encouragement. Nehemiah's plan came from God, but it was not God's perfect plan. It was good, but it was not the complete plan. So, what was God's perfect plan? You see, God sent Nehemiah on a mission to rebuild the holy city, to rebuild the temple, so that God's children can return to him and worship him together. He was given a huge mission, but God's mission was insurmountably larger because Yahweh God's vision was to see that city stretched throughout the world where all his children could be with him. He wanted that temple not just a singular place where a couple people could come in and worship him in his presence. He wanted that temple to stretch throughout that worldwide city and be within our hearts. He told Nehemiah to plant a seed. This seed was a small and incomplete part of a larger vision. Because Nehemiah was planting a seed, but God was building a garden. And he still is building that garden. And that's where he leaves us today. And it's what God's been challenging me with. That in this world, we will have trouble, we will have pain, we have failures and betrayals. And it's not because God has left us, because God's betrayed us, or because God's not good. It's because we are only seeing in part, because we are growing a seed in a garden, but God is growing that entire garden. Maybe when bad things come, when we feel forgotten, when we feel betrayed, maybe we just aren't seeing the entire picture. And I know that this doesn't ease the pain, it doesn't make it easier, but I'm hoping that it can give us all hope. Nehemiah cried out to God, "Remember me, oh my God, for good. Remember what I've done for you." But God hadn't forgotten him. He just wasn't finished with the work. And I've said that I'm preaching to myself today. And it's what God's been challenging me with because I have been having a tough time. And if I cry right now, I'm sorry. Because this is where I'm just being very real with this sermon and why God's been putting it on my heart. Because I've been struggling because my health has been bad. And it seems like every time I try to improve things to get closer to God, my health gets worse. And I found myself being like Nehemiah. Remember me, oh God, for good, all of the things that I've tried to do for you. And then I get worse. But God's been saying, I do remember you, just remember me. Last week during worship, they were playing It Is Well, not the hymn, but the more modern song. And in the bridge it says, "Let go, my soul, and trust in him. The waves and winds still know your name. And this is referencing a Bible verse that's very important to me. So important that I have it tattooed on my arm. So that says, "Peace, be still." So this passage is, if you don't know, Jesus and the disciples were on a boat in the sea, and a storm came. The disciples woke up. They were freaked out. They thought, surely we're going to die. So they woke Jesus up and begged him to do something. So I like to picture it like Jesus is lying in his bed, and they start shaking him. He's just, oh, what? And then they're like, we're going to die. The storm is going to drown us. And he's like, oh, peace, be still. And they're like, what's that, Rabbi? That's how I visioned the whole thing happening. But as soon as he said, peace, be still, the waves and winds calmed. Everything calmed down. The storm passed. And so Jesus has spoken to me so many times in the past that his peace is present in the storm. And this passage, why it's on my arm, is because it's kept me alive during the darker days of my life. When he reminded me of this during this passage, or during this part of the song, I don't know why I'm pointing to that, I'm not to it yet. When he reminded me of this part of this song, It Is Well, he then spoke to me about another song. It's not a worship song. They're kind of an indie alternative band most of you would hate. Joe likes. I found a fellow Me Without You fan. I don't find them often. They're very odd. But this passage was brought to me during this, when God said, I do remember you, remember me, when he brought it up in that song. He then reminded me of this passage of this song, where he says, if I'm a crown without a king, if I'm a broken open seed, if I come without a thing, then I come with all I need. And so maybe I am broken. Maybe I am incomplete. Maybe I'm struggling with sorrow, bitterness, maybe a bit of self-pity. Maybe I've been struggling with hopelessness. But here I am. I am here with all that I need. See, I said this was going to happen. I'm here with all that I need to become whole. Because this is where Jesus can work in my life. This is where Jesus can give me hope and fill me up with his love. And it's not an easy weight. It's not an easy thing to stand through. But he is saying, remember me as I have remembered you. Sorry. So God is making us perfect. He is making us whole. And it's a long story, and it's a painful story. But as Paul said, for now we see in part, but soon we will see face to face. And I'll just end it now on a promise that Jesus made. A promise that can give us all hope through whatever we face, whether it's good or bad. Mostly bad, because like I said, life is hard. Uh, he said, these things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. So be encouraged by that. I hope you can find hope and encouragement in that. So thank you.